How's it going, guys? John the Basic Expert here. Sorry this video is late today a little bit, and I owe my Subscribe Star and Gilded supporters a dungeon map this week still. Don't worry, that is coming. But just been a crazy week doing some freelancing for some publishers out there. So it's just been juggling a lot, at least last week and a half or so. So apologies for that, but the show must go on. We are going to continue our discussion on West End Games Star Wars D6, this fine game here that we've been covering for the last few weeks. And, one thing I have to say is how amazingly simple this game system is in a lot of ways. It's so simple. Again, all you need is some D6s and pencil and paper, and you can start off on a Star Wars adventure that's probably infinitely more interesting and exciting than anything Disney's put out as far as Star Wars is concerned.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
So this video, I wanted to just touch on combat a little bit and talk about these exact specifics of combat. We went over the basics of the rules in a previous video, but now we want to take a microscope and give a little more detail so that if you're interested in playing this game, you can kind of see how combat is going to play out, because combat's probably going to be a big part of your Star Wars adventure, your Star Wars campaign, and how does it feel? So it's not like D&D. So if you're only familiar with D&D, this is going to feel very different, but I quite like it. So first of all, there's a whole section on visualizing combat within the rules, in the rule books, and the interesting thing about this is that Star Wars D6, the Star Wars role-playing game, is designed specifically, first and foremost, to be played in theater of the mind. It does give you optional rules for miniatures. You do have movement rules, but you are generally expected to play Star Wars in theater of the mind, which I think is great. Saves money on miniatures and whatnot. And I have no problem with theater of the mind. It fits a more cinematic game. For instance, Call of Cthulhu, I run theater of the mind because it's a more ambient sort of more cinematic feel in both intellectual properties, that the system playing out in our minds just, to me, feels like it fits better than, say, a dungeon crawl like D&D. Not to say that you can't play D&D in theater of the mind. I have plenty of friends and I know plenty of GMs that do, and they do it successfully. It just seems like with D&D it's a little more split down the middle, where some people want to do theater of the mind and some people want to do miniatures and battle maps and grids or rulers and measurements, and it seems like it works equally well for both types of people, whereas this game seems like it's more designed for theater of the mind specifically. That's what the designers at West End Games had first and foremost in their mind, was everything is theater of the mind. Ship combat, laser gun, blaster combat, all of it is theater of the mind. So that's the first thing you need to get in your head as far as like when we look into this, is that there are rules for miniatures. You totally could play this with miniatures, but the game is designed to be used in theater of the mind. So let's talk about the advantages and disadvantages of this mode of play. So I'm just going to read this from the rule book here, and because I think it's good and it kind of explains the advantages and disadvantages of this. So it says, visualizing combat is fast. When they imagine things, players act and respond to what happens. Instead of studying a map and planning their next move, action is what combat should be about. But this style of combat requires a certain amount of judgment. You must decide at what range a character fires, how long it takes for him to close range when running toward an opponent, and so on. Novice game masters sometimes feel a little nervous about using their judgment. You shouldn't. Just follow the rules above and get on with it. If you are fair and consistent, your players will forgive minor errors and hesitations. This is true. Good advice. Occasionally, however, a player may argue, saying he's really at short range, or that he ought to be able to close with his opponent in one round when you say it will take two. There's really only one answer to this. You're the game master. Unless the player points out something you've overlooked, be apologetic, but make it clear that what you say goes. Advice that's lost in today's world of treating game masters like garbage. On the other hand, don't be arbitrary. be fair. The object of the game is to have a good time, not to frustrate your players. So I like that it gives game masters this leeway, and this is in a book where players are going to read it as well. And I like it. I like that stuff that's very clear in the rules, that the game master's word is law. You know, they're making judgments and give advice to game masters. You should be fair. You know, the rule 0 thing comes into effect of rulings over rules, which is very much, I think, an old school mentality, just because of the rules light nature of a lot of older games. But be fair, be consistent as a GM and as a player. When your game master makes a ruling, if they are being fair and consistent, or at least trying to be, don't be a jerk. They're doing the best they can. Combat happens in sequences, though, so let's go over that too. It says combat is divided into combat rounds. Each round represents 5 seconds. You keep on playing one combat round after another until one side is dead or has fled or surrendered. Each combat round follows this sequence. Decision segment. Decide what each non-player character NPC is going to do this combat round. While you're deciding, let the players decide what they want to do next. Declaration segment. Declare what you're going to do. I'm going to run over here. I'm going to shoot that guy. I'm going to whatever. Declare what you're going to do. First action sequence. This is where everything you declared in that segment is going to occur in the order that you declared it. So if a character said, I'm going to run behind that shipping crate, and then I'm going to blast the stormtrooper. Okay. So in the first segment, the movement towards the shipping crate occurs. There's also a second action segment where the blaster fire would occur, reducing that blaster fire by 1d because he ran or whatever to the crate, right? Let's say he ran to the crate. I'm going to run to the crate. I'm going to shoot the stormtrooper. First segment, he runs to the crate. Second segment, he fires his blaster, reducing it by 1 die on his die code. So super simple. As I stated before, initiative is essentially much like you kind of just say stuff, right? Like if you don't follow, like for instance, Shauner on YouTube, he talks a lot about how combat is as fast as the players can describe what they're doing, and this game seems really well suited for, I think, Shauner's style of play, in that players are just going to declare what they're doing, and then they do it. If something we gave an example in the last video going over the basics. If something is going to affect the results of another character, for instance, the ability to move or shoot or something like that, it's basically opposed rolls that are made, and that is like your initiative roll. So shooting your gun, if we're both shooting each other, me and the stormtrooper are shooting each other, we roll. Whoever rolls higher while also hitting their target is the one that gets their shot off. Gets the one that gets to fire while the other one does not. And I quite like that. It might seem a little, I think coming from a D&D brain, it might seem a little odd, but to me it's a rather elegant, simple system that really plays up the cinematic nature of play, the theater of the mind mode of play. So that's how initiative works. That's the combat segments. Let's go over fire combat real quick. So each distance, again, has varying ranges that players can, each weapon has different ranges that have different target numbers that must be hit if they hope to strike a target that they're shooting at. Within the rulebook, point blank is 5, number of 5. Short is 10, medium is 15, and 20 is, and long is 20. So the guns themselves, for instance, a blaster pistol is going to have a different short range than a blaster rifle. The blaster rifle obviously is going to have a longer range than the blaster pistol of some kind. So ranges are listed at the back of the book. We'll cover that maybe in a future video as a overview, but just know that you can reference in the back of the book, and there are ranges there for what each weapon has, or distance-wise, what the range is for each weapon. Every weapon has a damage code. Damage codes are listed on those weapon charts that I've listed. Again, the way this works is you're going to roll for damage if you are able to. First, there's a dodge, right? You shoot. The dodge is added to the target number to hit. So let's say I'm shooting at point blank. I'm shooting a stormtrooper. The stormtrooper gets a dodge. My short range is 5. Whatever the stormtrooper rolls is added to the 5, increasing the difficulty. So I have to make sure I roll pretty well in order to hit that stormtrooper. Let's say I still hit. I'm going to roll damage. Every weapon has a damage roll. Let's say it's 4D. 4 dice. I'm going to roll 4d6 for the damage, and the target that is struck is going to roll their strength in response to that. The difference between the two rolls will mean that the level of failure that the player has in regards to their rolling their strength in opposition to my damage, or vice versa, will determine whether the struck character is stunned, wounded, incapacitated, or mortally wounded, right? So very simple, no hit points or anything like that. Armor is something that it increases the strength code of when you're struck. So if you're wearing armor and you are shot, and let's say the armor increases the character strength code by 1d, and your strength code is 2d plus 1, you're going to roll 3d plus 1 when you are struck. So super simple, elegant. I like that. I think keeping track of damage in this kind of situation is relatively easy in that you're keeping track of statuses of where your character's at rather than hit points. So it's easy to write down a character and say, this character, especially as a game master, this stormtrooper is wounded, this one's incapacitated, this one is mortally wounded, this one's dead, this one's fine. So that, to me, it's just far easier to do that than track hit points. And it's a really simple system, which again, I think plays up the cinematic nature of the game. So I do rather quite like that. All right, so let's talk about when you are wounded in combat and what that means. How do you deal with it? So a wounded character can act and use skills, but your attribute scores are all reduced by 1d, and this will be a penalty that affects your character until your character heals, whether through a med pack, anything like that. Incapacitated characters are unable to act and use any skills until treated. Characters that fall unconscious can be restored to consciousness later, but they're going to be kind of groggy and they're not going to be able to use their skills. Mortally wounded characters cannot be roused from unconsciousness and cannot act or use skills, and a roll must be made. We covered this in the last video, every combat round, to avoid death. So we covered this in the basic. You have these things called med packs. Sometimes characters start with them as tools. These are things that characters might want to keep on hand. They're quite useful. So it's a package of drugs and medical equipment, coagulants, and computerized diagnostics that can be used as emergency medical care in the field in combat. So let's look at the rules here. I'm just going to read it. The difficulty of using the med pack depends on the severity of the wound itself, as summarized on the healing table. See page 140, much later in the book. If the user rolls equal to or higher than the difficulty number, he has treated the injured character. The treated character's wound status is reduced by 1 degree. That is, mortally wounded characters become incapacitated, incapacitated ones become wounded, and wounded ones become uninjured. The character's wound status can only be reduced by 1 degree. A character who is treated once cannot be healed further by med packs, only by rejuvenation tanks or natural healing. I quite like that. It's not just like, I have 5 med packs, let's just keep applying them to get you out of the state you're in. So I kind of like that. Wounded characters whose injuries are treated by med packs and become uninjured cannot be healed if wounded a second time that day. At least a day must pass before med pack can be used again. A wounded character can can use a med pack on himself, but his medical skill code is reduced by 1d as usual per wounded characters while he does so. The med pack is expended when used. Characters who expect to do a lot of healing should carry several. So, simple. You also have rejuvenation tanks or back to tanks, something that the Boba Fett series used all too often. A specially formulated treatment liquid which promotes rapid healing and acts as a disinfectant. And we see Luke floating in this in The Empire Strikes Back. After he gets attacked by the Wampa, whatever, in the snow. So someone who's placed in a rejuvenation tank will be healed. It's only a matter of time. And there's healing tables that kind of give you the ability that show you what how long it takes for your character to heal. There's also natural healing. And sometimes you can't get to a rejuvenation tank. So let's say you're wounded or a character is incapacitated and you are on a planet where there's no back to tanks. You're not near your starship. You're not going to be able to get someone into a back to tank to heal them. You stabilize them with a med pack. Now what do? It's just natural healing at that point. So in this case, you're going to make a strength attribute roll for the character once per day, starting the day after the injury. So injured, med pack, or maybe you're just injured. And then the next whole day, you can make a strength check. And you're going to refer to the natural healing section of the healing table. I'll have all the tables. They should already be appearing, but they'll appear on the screen as I'm talking about it. So, you're going to find the character's wound status, find the number of you rolled for him underneath it. It will tell you whether the character's wounds get better or worse. This is something I rather like because it kind of shows. I like systems where don't get me wrong. The D&D system, for instance, of 1 hit point a day is pretty good. It forces downtime. It forces characters to go back to town, take their time. They can't just like power through a dungeon, for instance, in D&D, because healing, especially if they don't have a spellcaster or a healer, like a cleric or something like that, is going to take some time. So it forces them to go back to town, forces them to really consider, do we want to keep going into this dungeon or do we want to leave and rest up before heading further in? But to me, D&D is a lot less of a, quote, cinematic game than this is. And so I like that healing becomes a more cinematic thing. Something that it's like where laying in bed and trying to recover is something that when you're rolling dice, you're like, am I going to get better? Is my character going to get better? Is my buddy, the NPC follower we have, are they going to get better? I rather like that. It fits with the cinematic nature, I think, because, you know, in Star Wars, when someone's wounded, when Luke's hand gets cut off, when he's in the back to tank, when Han is blinded, when people are injured, it creates tension, right? It creates an interesting situation beyond just the stormtroopers or Darth Vader or whoever it is that's hunting the heroes down. It creates an extra sense of tension and threat to the players, which I quite like. The next section we're going to talk about, and this will be a future video, will be starships. Starships as in regards to how they are portrayed in the core rulebook here. We will cover that in a future video. For now, I think this is enough information to digest, to talk about. But as you can see, it's really simple. I want to keep these videos concise and to the point on topic. So I think going into starships would be a little too much in regards to information and disjointed information that isn't within the purview of this video. But starships are cool, and we'll cover that in a future video. But I hope combat sort of makes sense. It really is just say what you're going to do and the number of things you're going to do. There's segments that apply to those, and you're going to be reducing skill codes by 1d for the more skills you do. If you're running, you're going to be reducing skill codes. I think, if I remember correctly, you can walk, and it won't reduce any skill codes by 1d. But obviously, when you're under fire, you're not going to be leisurely strolling into cover, unless you feel really confident about yourself or it's really close by. So that's going to do it for this video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it and continue to be interested in West End game, Star Wars D6 role-playing game that it's a really elegant game, really elegant system, and I really quite enjoy it. It's perfect for one-shots. You could easily run long-term campaigns in this. I love the cinematic feel of it. It's so different from, you know, the normal D&D stuff that I'm normally running and doing, so I quite like that, and I hope you quite like it too. If you want to support what my channel's doing, you can support me on Subscribestar. Subscribestar supporters get dungeon maps. They get adventures a month. This month's adventure is called Castle Ravir. It's a 6th level dungeon into the lair of Ravir the Black, who is a black dragon. Old OSR compatible. Any OSR system you're using, it will be compatible with. And that is this month's. Last month's was some alchemy stuff. So you can support on Subscribestar, you can support here on YouTube, or you can support on my Gilded server. And the Gilded server is a cool place. I really want to encourage people to check it out. If you got some thick skin, because if you have a hot take, you're gonna have to defend yourself, because it's free speech. I run it as a free speech sort of place. But it's full of good people. We're running games from there, and we chat about old school games, not just D&D, but West End games, Star Wars D6, Call of Cthulhu, RuneQuest, Traveler, any kind of game that you might be interested in. Someone's in there probably talking about it and maybe looking to run it. So make sure you check out the Gilded server. All those links are in my link tree in the video description below. So make sure you check those out. And until the next video, guys, I'll talk to you later. Peace out.